Hi everyone, welcome to this Fire Circle event where we will discuss alternative approaches to cancer. Tonight I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Schmidt, our physician and gastroenterologist on the Fire team, and Dr. Frank Muller, pharmacologist, clinical pharmacologist, medical doctor, and naturopath. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Steph. Good evening. Oh,
Oh, okay, that's okay. This is part of the show. Okay, we're not going to cut this because it's a good day, good morning, good
sorry.
evening. Okay, we're in different time zones. Okay, so let's.
Hello, Steph, and thanks for having me.
uh,
I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Good afternoon, Stephen. How are you? Hi, Frank. Welcome to the fire cancer talk. You've had a high haircut, Frank, or are you also just losing
Yes,
hair?
especially for this event, I had my haircut.
You had your haircut. Okay, great. Stephen,
This afternoon.
Stephen, you didn't have a haircut. It's just a natural
I
deterioration of
yeah.
hair cells.
I don't need a haircut, or I don't need a haircut, and I have not found a diet that will grow my hair. So I'm cool.
Okay. Bob's your uncle. Okay, you remember the people who years ago this Bob tablet that you gave to dogs? They believed that that will grow your hair, something like that. Yes,
Bob Martin.
Bob Martin. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, um, let's get on to tonight's or today's topic: cancer. Many of the participants in the fire circle um, do have cancer. They've been diagnosed with cancer. They have family members that's been diagnosed with cancer or friends. Some newly diagnosed and they must make a decision: must they go for radiotherapy, chemotherapy, hormone therapy, or just stick to the fire lifestyle, or is there any other thing that they must do? So all these questions, and it's sort of a difficult decision to make. Even if cancer is life threatening, what's your approach to prevent this, to treat this? It's easy to suggest something to somebody else, but if it's me, what will I do? So, Frank, let's first kick off and just talk about cancer and what's the cause of cancer? There are so many stories. It's in your genes, or no, it's just a metabolic disease of lifestyle. Frank?
Thanks, Steph. Yes, the big question is cancer a genetic disease or a metabolic disease? It's a big question, as was debated extensively in the 20th century. Initially, Otto Warburg proved that cancer was a metabolic disease dependent on acidity in the tissue environment, and then the genetic theory started taking over, and until his death, Otto Warburg was trying to convince the cancer block of doctors that it's not a genetic disease. And quite a lot of other studies came out to show that it was metabolic, but the genetic idea won out in the 1970s and onward. Cancer was treated like a genetic disease. So if you had the wrong kinds of genes, you got cancer, and there was nothing you could do about it. By now, we have found that there are hundreds and hundreds of genes that can be associated with cancer. So the dream of finding a single genetic blocker or genetic marker for cancer has disappeared. And in these past 40, 50 years, cancer has suddenly shot right through the roof. So then you cannot blame on genetics. You cannot, within 1 or 2 generations, go from almost nobody having cancer to a vast amount of the population having cancer. It's becoming one of the top causes of death around the world. So how did that happen? How did cancer go from just a rare disease to a massive problem in such a short time? And you got to accept the fact that it's not genetics, it is metabolic. But if it's metabolic, it changes the whole question. It changes absolutely everything about cancer.
Stephen?
Yeah, Frank is completely correct. There's some interesting facts if you go through the history of cancer. So about 100 years ago in 1910, in fact, it was recorded then, your top 4 or 5 causes of death were infections, be it heart infections, lung infections, brain infections, skin. It was infections. Cancer did not feature on those graphs. And not 60, 70 years later, up until now, cancer, together with heart disease and diabetes, are they the leading causes of death. And like Frank said, you cannot change your genetics in a century. It takes far longer to change that. Mm-hmm. And that's why we call it epigenetics. It is how your genes are changed by how you live and what you are exposed to. Just one other little thing that I have to say is there was a period when a large contingent of people, not a large contingent of people, but a good contingent of people were very suspicious of infectious causes, because we had diseases like hepatitis causing liver cancer and viruses causing lymphoma and Helicobacter causing stomach cancer. But the process is probably not just the infectious agent itself, but rather the inflammation that follows the chronic infection. So genetics, it ain't. Epigenetics, or what it does to your God-given genes, that is the cause.
So if we accept that the metabolic cause of cancer is probably the majority, and there's a small portion of genetics that, yeah, okay, that's pure genetics. Very few cancers where that's the case. So if it's metabolic, Stephen, you always use a wonderful example of 3 things that go wrong in a cell that can contribute to or can lead to cancer.
Yes.
In a sense, those 3 processes are the 3 processes of disease happening on a cellular level. Because Absolutely. Every disease starts in a cell. And that's something we often forget. It's something that happens, and all cells on the inside are pretty much the same, aren't they?
Quite correct. There are just a few differences in cells. Obviously, in cell function, there's a lot of difference. Some cells don't have nuclei and so on, but more or less the cell is exactly the same. And the cell processes are exactly the same. So if you can think about it this way, you have a normal cell and it's under good conditions. It would replicate, it would condition itself, it would have a cycle where it can kill itself and form new cells, utilize stem cells to make new cells, and everything is fine. When things go wrong is when the processes, and those 3 processes you are talking about, is inflammation, oxidation, and toxification. In other words, poisons, environment like pathogens like viruses, bacteria, etc., heavy metals, and then diet. The diet plays a large role. And those 3 processes make your cells sick. Your body has certain mechanisms by which it can protect itself from those 3 processes. And your body also has the intelligence and the mechanism of taking bad-looking cells that are not going to survive, kill them off, and remove them.
So if you look at those 3 processes, you've said there's inflammation.
Yes.
So just explain inflammation a little bit to us.
Okay, so
inflammation is not just taking Voltaren because you have a muscle ache and you need anti-inflammatories. Inflammation is something different, hey?
So inflammation is, if you take a virus, for instance, you get a virus comes into your cell, it triggers a lot of mechanisms. Those messages go through to your nucleus. Your nucleus makes the center of the cell, where the DNA is. it gives certain commands to your cell to make factors, which we call cytokines, which causes chaos and inflammation. The first attempt of that inflammation is to protect against this virus and to get rid of the virus. That's why you get the fever and you get the sore throat. That's a whole inflammatory process. An acute inflammation would be like a cold. But if it is chronically inflamed, then things start going wrong and you can lose control over this. The cell can lose control over its own processes and start growing out of proportion and not kill itself, as I mentioned before. That is inflammation.
Frank, if you talk about inflammation and talking about insulin resistance and inflammation, we always say that insulin resistance, diabetes, it's a condition of inflammation. Why are we saying this?
But there are many different levels to answer. Primarily understand that insulin is an inflammatory or pro-inflammatory hormone. So wherever insulin goes, inflammation follows. One of the reasons for this is that inflammation causes fat deposits to be formed. And often what we don't fully appreciate is that often fat is a reservoir or a storage place for toxins in the body, because the majority of toxins are fat soluble. So in a sense, fat becomes a repository of inflammation because it holds the various toxins hostage. We need the fat to protect us from these toxins in one sense, but on the other hand, also then if the fat is dissolved or used up, then the toxins are released and you get a toxic effect and more inflammation. So a state of being adipose, obese, is a state of high inflammatory conditions in the body. It's a state of acidity, and insulin is a driving force behind this. It's not the only hormone, but specifically talking in the fire context in type 2 diabetes, it is a very important hormone in the causation of inflammation in the body. And that's why we see, as a thumbs up, it's not universal, about double the risk of cancer in type 2 diabetics compared to non-diabetic and non-insulin resistant people. It varies from cancer to cancer, but that's a general statement I'm making there.
So Frank, Stephen, Frank just mentioned acidity. So an acidity can also be linked to the second pillar in what's going wrong in a cell, not just inflammation, but then acidity and oxidation. What is this acidic oxidation axis? What is that?
Okay, so simply put, it is the process by, okay, so if you eat incorrectly, let's just deal with diet because of the application to fire. So if you eat incorrectly, and we all know what incorrect is, then you get formation of little scavengers. If you can remember the Pac-Man game, little Pac-Man, it's called radical oxygen species, radical nitric species, and there are other electric species as well. So they are substances that are, if you draw the analogy to rust of a piece of metal that rusts, there are substances that injure the cell and they injure the DNA of the cell. So you've got these processes of inflammation, toxins, and these radical oxygen nitric species, which is formed because of the way that you eat, especially through the mitochondrium, that continuously attack your cell. And if you want to understand, a simple little thing I have in my mind is if you're in a shower and you have a shower mixer between hot and cold, if you put it right on hot and you're inflamed, and you're chronically inflamed, you're in trouble. And your body has mechanisms of just toning it down a little bit to bring the temperature of the water down. There are inborn mechanisms that can protect you against that. But the more you do wrong, smoking, eating badly, being exposed to all kinds of pesticides and radiation and things like that, the more you do wrong, the higher the stress on the cell is, and the more likely it is that it's going to go in the wrong direction, rather than to follow the normal cell pattern by which an abnormal cell will be killed off and taken away, and then you start getting growth.
So oxidation, which is the same as rust, I'm rusting on the inside.
Yes.
Frank, why is rusting on the inside more linked to sugar and high sugar consumption than fat consumption?
Thanks. In the consumption of glucose, you basically have half the amount of energy produced and twice as much waste produced compared to the same amount of fat. So burning fat means you get more energy gram for gram, and you get much less waste gram per gram. And this is the important part, because Stephen was also pointing out about toxins. These waste products that are produced during the burning of both glucose and fat have the potential to be toxic. And in particular, if you have too much of certain toxins produced, carbon dioxide being one, which turns into an acid, and then also urea, then you have an inflammatory environment that comes about. I always explain to patients that acidity is a bit like a juicy red steak thrown into the sea to a great white shark. It's irresistible, and acidity in the body then draws the wrong kind of attention, and it creates an environment where a cell cannot recover. It stays sick. So you do need to get rid of the acidity, get rid of that red steak that attracts the wrong attention and is able to get the cell out of the sick cell environment. If this doesn't happen, the cell has some options, and one of those options is to go rogue. And it's basically where the cells of the body have a contract that they say, we're going to work together for mutual good, and each one's going to do its own thing, but we're going to do it together so that everybody benefits. But now the cell says to the body, you have given me a sick environment, you're not doing anything about it, so I'm going to go back to my original state, basically bacterial state, and our cancer cells form, which operate on their own, completely independent of all stimuli. Basically, they still have some residual stimuli that they respond to, and that is partly of where we can have a treatment. But in general, a cancer cell just behaves like a bacteria in a yeast or something in a bread dough or in a beer. They just do their own thing. They take the nutrients out of the environment and they use the nutrients to burn them fermentation-wise. So they produce acid, and they use the acid, the lactic acid in particular, to build more cells. So you give it rampant upscaling of growth, and these cancer cells become immortal. They don't die anymore. They just keep on replicating, keep on eating, keep on growing. And so this is one response the body can have to chronic inflammation and acidity, which is the result of oxidation or rust, as Stephen calls it. So if you do not do anything about inflammation and oxidation, you eventually are going to have a situation where cells say, in order for me to save my own bacon, I need to jump ship and just start using my own means to survive this sick soup I'm living in.
So it sounds like a story of betrayal here, where usually the body and all the cells work in tandem to grow, to prosper, they're helping each other. Now there's a sick environment, inflammation, acidity, oxidation, we're rusting, we're inflamed, and certain cells become sick, and they say, well, I can't trust the environment anymore to protect. You're not collaborating with me, so I'm going my own way. How does that work, Stephen?
Oh, that's a very complicated question. But there are three ways in which the cells communicate. Okay, so first thing I want to say is, if you have this toxic soup that Frank is talking about, then there's a very, very complicated mechanisms whereby the cell produces what we call growth factors, because a cancer has one mission in life, and that is to grow. It grows, 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 grows. And as Frank nicely explained, it adopts its own metabolism. It adopts its own way to survive. Loves certain fuels like glucose, and it grows. The normal cell would have brakes put on a situation like that. They are called tumor retardation genes. What is it, Frank? I've lost the word now. There are certain factors that restrict the growth under normal circumstances. But the toxic environment and certain toxins can actually make you lose those brakes, so it just keeps on going. Now, the cell can either talk to itself and say things aren't going well here, and the growth starts, or it can signal to neighbors, or it can signal far away through hormones, and the process starts. And when it's been switched over to this process where you have uncontrolled growth, no brakes, you basically have a cancer together with the altered metabolism.
So on the one hand,
it then becomes a being completely by itself, and it thrives off its neighbors, and it thrives off its environment, and it steals from other cells, and takes nutrients.
So we've said now 3 things go wrong in a cell: the inflammation, then the oxidation and the acidification, and the third one we've mentioned is toxins. So you've mentioned some of the toxins may be bacteria, stuff coming into the body. Frank, any other toxins that can mess up a cell so that it will go into a state to say, okay, this environment is so toxic, I'm going to break away, going into this retarded state of just being a bacteria and just replicating, growing, and stealing from the neighbors. I'm now a criminal. What type of toxins you know about infection that can cause that? Any other toxins nowadays?
Yeah, so it's a very, very long list, and I'm not going to give you the exhaustive list. We looking at metals, so metals like mercury and lead and cadmium can all contribute to a toxic environment. We're looking at infections with yeasts. We mentioned bacteria, but yeast infections, the majority of breast cancer patients have got a chronic candida infection, for example. I've not met many breast cancer patients who didn't have a long-standing history of candida infection. So candida is definitely a contributing factor, mainly through the toxins it produces when it is happy in the body. Then you can look at other environmental causes like air pollution that increases carbon dioxide, decreases the oxygen levels. Oxygen is key. The more oxygen you have, the less likely your risk of cancer. And the more carbon dioxide, the bigger your risk of cancer. So always remember, carbon dioxide turns into acid in the body, and it's one of the body's biggest bugbears is to get rid of all the excess carbon dioxide. And there are a number of mechanisms for this, but if those mechanisms fail, then you have an environment of acidity where the cancer can grow. We look at, in the modern world, what they call EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. It just so happens that the mobile radiation and the Wi-Fi radiation block vitamin D activation at 2 different levels. So in a modern environment, your vitamin D levels will be chronically low because of these 2 frequencies are constantly competing for our attention. So there is a lot to be said about electromagnetic frequencies and cancer development, because vitamin D is one of the key cancer preventers in the body. It prevents DNA from being replicated incorrectly. Then, yes, we can look at many other food substances. If you just go into the food aisle in any supermarket, most of those products, in some cases 3/4 of the products, they have added fructose, glucose, which we know fructose to be a cancer inducer. We have so many other food additives, the sweeteners, for example. It is more and more research coming out that the artificial sweeteners, aspartame and the lot there are causing cancer or definitely associated with a higher risk of cancer. So yeah, the whole environment we find ourselves in, food, our water, full of pesticides, and yeah, the Roundup is everywhere. The glyphosate herbicide, and that causes cancer at 3 or 4 different mechanisms. And you can't even get a bottle of tap water or even bottled water which doesn't have Roundup in it nowadays. Everywhere you look, there is toxins in our environment, and I'm coming to the point where I just advocate people to live a low tox life. You can no longer get rid of all the toxins, but you can at least have a life where the amount of toxic load in your environment is limited to the extent that you can focus on healing instead of constantly just fighting for survival.
So Stephen, thanks Frank. Stephen, if we look at these 3 processes that cause a cell to become sick and that can lead to cancer, what would be your approach to prevent cancer, looking at these 3 things? Frank now mentioned, okay, you can go lower on toxins, but it's very difficult to get rid of all the toxins. But if you look at the other things, what are the things that people can consider, especially those in the fire circle, to prevent cancer or reduce the risk of cancer?
Sure. You've got to mention smoking, of course, which is probably the biggest one. If you take an attitude of, well, my word is avoid, but Frank is quite right. You cannot avoid toxins. You cannot avoid in our lifestyle today, but let's call it avoid. And that the biggest implication for fire and for this group is the diet. The body cannot handle and manage and survive the high carbohydrate load that we give to our bodies. It cannot take it. It hasn't evolved enough to handle it. So it is without a doubt the one thing that you have most control over, is that you should change your diet. You should go from a high carb diet and processed foods and the seed oils, take that out of your diet and do exactly as we teach. So always try and remember this concept that you have inflammation and you have anti-inflammation inside your body. They're on a scale, they're in balance. And your body has this ability to fight this inflammation, but if it's overloaded, it can't. So the first approach should be to avoid or to lessen, reduce your toxin intake. You should obviously stop smoking. You should look at your water. You should eat the way we say you should eat. Don't buy in the middle aisles, buy in the side aisles where the fresh fruit and veggies are as fresh as you can, preferably if you can get it straight from the soil. You have to eat this way. Aside from the fact that if you're talking about a preventative attitude or preventative measures, you should live like that. If you do have malignancy, a cancer, in whatever stage, you should also follow this diet together with intermittent fasting and fasting, because it's not entirely correct the way I'm going to say that now, but you are starving this cancer because it thrives on glucose. So the first big group would be to avoid or to reduce. Let me give the second one over to Frank. I'm talking too much.
I just want to ask, quickly interrupt here. You know, so other people may be watching this discussion who are not so familiar with the fire lifestyle. And we just say, okay, sugar and carbs contribute to the inflammation, to the oxidation, and even to the toxins, because a lot of the stuff is sprayed with things that's toxins. So now you say, okay, you have to go low carb, high fat. But when you go to your doctor, And if you go to the Cancer Association's website, the first thing they say is you shouldn't eat fat because fat is causing cancer. And I mean, who can disagree with all the experts and the Cancer Association telling you that you must eat margarine and not butter because that's so dangerous, and you must eat canola because that's the way to go? How do we go around all the experts telling us that you can't eat fat because that will cause the cancer, especially meat?
Well, let me just say one thing, and then Frank can go on. I just want to say one thing. Get back to the statement we made earlier on. Cancer was not an issue 100 years ago. In the 1960s, 1970s is when certain people scientists and politicians, maybe deliberately, maybe by accident, made decisions. And if you're my age, you will remember that time very, very vividly, because all of a sudden we had to get rid of the butter, and we had to eat a horrible margarine, and we had to get rid of the lard, and we had to start using these oils. And all of a sudden, everything was without fat loaded in sugar. Of course, the children love that. But it's not causation. You can't say just from that it's caused, but the association is extremely strong. So from the 1980s, if you look at any graph, you will see that diabetes soared, obesity soared, autoimmune disease soared, cancer soared. So there is no doubt that it's the carbohydrates and the sugar that feeds the cancer. And the best example, and then I'll hand over to Frank, can be found in a test for those who are familiar with cancer investigation that you call a PET scan. A PET scan is there to detect if there are cancerous spreads in your body or where the tumors lie. And what they physically do is they take glucose, they take sugar, and they attach radioactivity to it, and they inject it into your body. The cancers love the sugar because it thrives on carbohydrates and sugar and takes the radioactivity with it, and that's how it identifies on the PET scan. So it is without a doubt. You cannot starve a cancer completely of sugar, because there's always a degree of sugar in your blood, but you should try your best to starve it of glucose and to give it very high dense calorie meals, and that is fat. And God gave us these fats, so there's no reason why I should avoid them. That's philosophical. Frank, you give us the
I mean, if fat was so dangerous, there won't be a Khoi person alive today, and no Eskimo and Inuit will be alive today, I guess. Frank?
Well, our ancestors lived off fat. You can go into any culture, because fat had a long shelf life in a culture where there were no freezers or fridges. So around the world, before electricity came, we had to eat our food stored at room temperature, and you could only store vegetables so long. But fat, rendered fat, etc., had a long shelf life. There's one food in America, it's called pemmican, which is a combination of rendered lard and a variety of other substances, including dried cranberries and grated dried meat. And it's said that the entire front, the Western Front, was won based on pemmican, because these explorers could only carry this a small amount of food with them, and this was pemmican which they took with them, and they could, with this, literally do anything, where they're just basically eating pure fat and protein, and nothing bad happened to them. And in fact, they were able to travel right across the whole width of America just based on this one kind of food. So that's just one example of ancestors just eating plain fat. And you can go to any culture, 130, 140 years ago, fat was a mainstay of their diet. And there was no heart attacks to speak of, no cancer to speak of. I can give you so many stories. There was no cancer in Africa until the 1920s. and when the indigenous tribes started eating the colonists' food. So that's the whole point. Wherever the Western diet went, metabolic disaster followed. And the reason for this is that the Western diet became increasingly fiber deficient, and then, of course, in the 60s, 70s, fat deficient. So nutrients were leached out, and important nutrients that were feeding the microbes, that were feeding us, were no longer present, and nutrients are brought in that were causing acidification, oxidation, inflammation, and it's just a cascade of woes. If you look at how the Western diet has developed and what it is now, I love the acronym, the Standard American Diet, SAD, SAD, is a very accurate description of where we're at. And if you're interested in indigenous foods, these are so much more interesting to eat than the Standard American diet, and so much healthier. So if you live on these ancient diets, actually your risks are so much lower. And we can go on for a long time about this as well. I'm not going to go into it now. Just a couple of things. To paraphrase an old idiom, prevention is 9/10 of the cure. It's far easier to prevent cancer than it is to cure it, no matter which option you look at. So when you talk cancer prevention, listen to the FIRE circle, FIRE lifestyle. That advice is one of the best cancer preventative diets you can ever get. If you talk about fat, there's actually not research that shows that fat causes cancer as such, but the research that does link fat to cancer has always made this little error behind the scenes, which you pick up on as a lump the heat processed seed oils together with fats. And once you make that, put those two groups together, saturated fats and polyunsaturated fats, and put them in the same category and call that fats, then suddenly the polyunsaturated fats, which are definitely causative in cancer, suddenly bring down the whole category of fat, and now people say that fat causes cancer. If you would split it up and look at saturated fat separately from the other fats, it does not cause cancer, it does not cause heart disease. The only way you can get that done in a scientific study is to lump polyunsaturated fats with saturated fats in order to make saturated fats look bad. And then kind of just forget to mention polyunsaturated fats like sunflower oil, canola oil, even sesame oil is heat processed. There's so many oils nowadays that are being heat processed that it really is, again, ubiquitous in our environment. And that's the fat that you should be aware of and afraid of, not animal fat, not cold-pressed seed oils, olive oil, and macadamia oil, etc. Those are fine.
Yeah, and then obviously many of those studies, when they do study fats, they don't exclude that those people were also taking carbohydrates and sugars.
That's it. I wanted to add that as well. It's also that if you want an argument against this, you shouldn't eat bacon, you shouldn't eat
eggs,
barbecue or bryflace. They never forget to mention it was preceded by pancakes and it's concluded by a large fruit juice. And it's baked and it's fried in the seed oils. A good way of thinking about this, and I don't want to punt religion, but if it's God made, it's fine. If it's man made, it's bad. God makes butter through milk. Man makes margarine. Just reason that way. And if you find more than, well, I used to say 4 things on the label, put it back on the shelf. In fact, you shouldn't even buy something with a label. But if you find things that you cannot recognize or more than 2 or 3 things on a label, do not buy it, do not consume it. It's not the fat, it's not the meat. It's the processed foods, seed oils, and the sugars, and the fructose.
Right. Let's get back. Yes, Frank?
I just often say, if it comes in a plastic wrapper, don't buy it. And also, the more hands touch it between the farm and you, the less likely it is to be good for you. So what Stephen calls God food, farm to table, keep that chain as short as possible. That's the healthiest. And make sure, of course, the farmer himself doesn't touch the food with toxins and things. So there's a number of places where you can intervene in the process, modifiable risk factors. And as Stephen has pointed out, the ingredient list is important. It's always a a trigger for alarm if you see lots of ingredients, because it means that food has been taken apart and reassembled, and the final product is not way less healthy than the original product.
Okay, so let's get back to cancer. Often we see patients. They've been diagnosed with cancer yesterday. The doctor told them, we have to cut that out tomorrow, and then we'll start with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, hormone therapy. We must cut this out. It's gonna kill you, and you just want to get rid of this alien that's gonna destroy you and kill you. Stephen, must you react in such a great hurry?
No. Look, we spoke about it earlier. It's easy for us to speak. We're sitting here. But what you've got to understand is everything that we've spoken about now happens over a period of time. I think it's just Frank had mentioned once before that we all have cancers. We all have potential cancers, processes that go wrong in our bodies. It's just the way that you suppress them. But if you've been diagnosed with a malignancy, whether it is a single tumor without spread or whether it is widespread, it's been happening for a long period of time. You have to just step back, can't say relax, analyze, get information, as much as information as you can before you make a decision. It is crucial not to be drawn into, you've got to be hospitalized tomorrow, you've got to have your chemotherapy on Wednesday, you've got to have your radiotherapy on Friday. Certain conditions do ask for urgency. If tumors are large and they're compressing certain organs, or they're obstructing your bowel, or they may be pressing on your bile ducts, then you have to, for that reason, you would have to act quicker. But Frank, I'm sure you agree with me. One must take a deep breath. One must consult with as many people as you can, get all the information, educate yourself now, because that's the other thing. In this process, you are educating yourself so well, you're becoming far more clever than most doctors are. So you're in a preventative phase now, and you should know that if something like that happens to you, you can just sit back and just take in all the information before you overreact.
Yes, I often tell patients, by the time a cancer is 1 centimeter big, it's been in your body for 10 to 15 years already. So normally when we detect a cancer in our bodies, they are 1 centimeter or bigger. So you've been living with that cancer for a decade. Now your oncologist tells you you've got to have the surgery within the next 2 weeks. Where's the logic? If I went into the literature at some point to look at cancer outcomes post-surgery, and there is no evidence where the studies were done properly that surgery actually has any impact on the 5-year survival rate of a cancer patient. Now, to me, it's not intuitive. I'm a surgeon at heart. I really would like to cut it out. I don't want to sit with a cancer if I've got a cancer. But if I look at the science, there's no reason why it should be cut out. The science says whether you cut it out or not makes no difference to the 5-year survival rate. As Stephen said, obviously there are some conditions where you want to try and save a major organ or so which is threatened by cancer, but those are the exception. In the general sense, lady goes for a mammogram, a cancer is picked up in the breast, which she's not even aware of, is too small, and 3/4 of the time it's probably only a patch of inflammation. It's not even a proper cancer, but it results in an entire cascade of surgery, mastectomy, followed by radiation, followed by decades of chemo, completely unnecessary for something that could have been cured just by a few lifestyle modifications, some phytonutrients. And yes, that completely just grates my carrot to see this happening over and over again. And part of the reason why I'm sitting here, and part of the reason I'm involved with the Fire Circle and the whole idea of metabolic shifts in the body is you can do so much more than your oncologist can if you just listen to what we're saying about where cancer comes from, where it's going, and how to fight it. There are things that a cancer cannot do. It cannot burn fat, except for melanoma. All other cancers can only burn glucose. So you need to limit the glucose levels and a couple of other things that cancers need to survive. So it's possible just by being intelligent and methodical and scientific about it to actually attack your cancer. And to me, I've got three big pillars in my cancer treatment. It's build the body, boost the immune system, and kill the cancer. And the three go together, and build the body is actually my number one. It's more important to get your muscles strong than it is to fight the cancer, because about a third to a half of cancer patients die because not of the cancer, but because of something we call cachexia, the loss of muscle. And eventually you get so weak you can't breathe and then you die. That is what causes death, not cancer. Between a third and a half of cases. So you need to build the body, and the stronger your body is, the longer you're going to live and the better your quality of life. On the other hand, boost the immune system. The immune system has attacked the cancer. Now, that's one of my biggest gripes against chemotherapy, is it blasts the immune system. And what you're left with is an immune system that's incapable of attacking the cancer. And now you're trying to let the person recover, but all that's going to happen is that the cancer is going to keep on growing because the immune system is not able to keep it in check. And then lastly, attack the cancer. There are some amazing plant substances that you can use which can weaken or kill cancers, or at least put it on the back foot, metabolically speaking, so that the immune system can come and attack it. So those are the three approaches which I prefer to use when I talk about cancer treatment, active treatment. So on the prevention side, we've got toxins, inflammation, and oxidation. And on the active treatment side, we've got build the body, boost the immune system, and attack the cancer.
Stephen, if we say about phytonutrients that can help to fight cancer, there are a few new kids on the block. There are some amazing stuff from vitamin D to vitamin E, certain types of vitamin E that plays a huge role and can play a huge role in as a chemotherapy, if we call it like that.
Yes, I'm a physician and a gastroenterologist, and I've been doing this allopathic kind of work most of my life. And I only started waking up to metabolic cause for disease a short while back. Frank is the expert when it comes to the detail of the phytonutrients. But because I'm a gastroenterologist, I was confronted with liver disease in a large way, which we couldn't do anything about. Fatty liver disease turning into cirrhosis, and I investigated and researched and came across this different type of vitamin E called tocotrienol, and had amazing results from fatty liver disease and later on skin problems and having done a lot of research, and I'm sure Frank can support me on this. It is absolutely incredible, and it's not only tocotrienol, there are other products as well, which Frank can talk about, that attacks the cancers, not only the cancer, it addresses the inflammation, it addresses the oxidation, it detoxifies, it stimulates the immune system, it stops the growth factors of cancers that are secreted, it stops the blood supply of cancers, and that's why it's spread. It can directly kill the spread cells or the metastases or the spread, as we call them, of these cancers, without affecting any normal cells. And that puts it, those two things puts it aside from chemotherapy. Because chemotherapy, every drug, number one, is non-selective. It will kill the cancer cell, possibly, but it will also destroy your normal cells. And there goes your immune system, and there goes your cachexia, as Frank said. So that's extremely important, and it's uni-targeted, only targets one process, where these phytonutrients, they attack, or they have multiple targets where they can work. You can see this board behind me here is mostly about oxidation and inflammation, but all those little lines and all those little arrows are all places where these phytonutrients can work. And very short period of time now, with many illnesses, autoimmune illnesses, skin problems, prostate cancer, breast cancer, antioxidant to chemotherapy. This product called tocotrienol has really amazed me. And that's the last thing I'll say on this. And having had experience with tocotrienol with my liver disease patients, and I started looking around, and I started speaking to Frank, and I started hearing to everything else that there is. Again, God provides through the plants. God provides through the roots and the nature to help us to fight these things. So two things: you must avoid feeding your cancer, as Frank says, and secondly, there are many phytonutrients or plant chemicals that you can also incorporate into your diet. For instance, garlic and onion and pawpaws and other things that Frank knows far more about than I do.
Frank.
Yes. What more can I say? Stephen said it all. Yes. So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation where you can simply give somebody a list and it works for every cancer. But there are certain things like vitamin D and tocotrienol which benefit just about any cancer I've come across. You need to understand also why do plants have anti-cancer effects? And for the most part, it is factors in the plants which are for self-protection, which are giving us anti-cancer benefits. In seeds, you often have growth inhibitors, which are there to keep the seed dormant for many years, so that there's the increased rate of survival of the seed is dependent on these growth inhibitors. But if you take the seed and you eat them, then you get the growth inhibitors and they work on the cancer cells. That's just one example of many different phytonutrients that are out there. The plants are not out there thinking, what good things can we do for humans? They're there, how can we protect ourselves? But in the process, they're producing the very things that we need to survive. And so, yes, there's a wealth of plant products. I'm just thinking of green tea extract. It's called EGCG for short, which has more anti-cancer points where it works against the cancer than any other plant I've come across. But there are about 3 dozen metabolic pathways inside a cancer cell where you can block it. And so the nice thing is when you use phytonutrients that you can have one nutrient blocking 10 or more pathways, and you just combine quite a few of these, and suddenly you've got virtually all 3 dozen blocked. And that's amazing, because no cancer chemotherapeutic agent does that. All they can do is they can, as Stephen has said, just block one pathway at a time. And once you start combining 2 or 3 different chemotherapeutic agents, the combined toxicity is so bad that you cannot persist for very long with these. You have to actually have experienced the toxicity to understand how bad it is. So just throwing various nuclear bombs on top of the cancer cell destroys so much of the body that you cannot do too much combination therapy with these agents.
Frank, let's say somebody made the choice. I'm going to go for chemotherapy, but I also would like to do the stuff that we've just talked about, the fire stuff. How do you prepare yourself for the chemotherapy? And Stephen, you earlier also mentioned fasting. So if you know that I'm going for chemotherapy tomorrow, then I'll obviously tell the guy, no, I rather want to come in 6 weeks' time or for over a month's time. I first want to prepare my body. Don't intimidate me. So how will you prepare your body up to the day of receiving the chemotherapy or the surgery, for that matter?
I just want to make a note here that in my experience, I'm talking roughly 500 cancer patients over an 8-year period. The people who did worst were those who combined phytonutrient therapy with chemotherapy, because most of the phytonutrients depend on a healthy cell metabolism, and that is absent in a situation where there's chemotherapy, and then it seems as though there are more toxins building up than is good. So the best outcomes I've had in the past 8 years have been with patients who've just gone the phytonutrient supplement route, together with obviously the fire lifestyle approaches. And then the worst was a combination of chemo and phytonutrients. Now, if you say, okay, I want to do chemo, okay, you're going to spend 4 to 6 weeks preparing your body, going into ketosis as much as possible. So when I say ketosis, I don't cut out fruits. You're still going to continue eating your fruits of at least one fist-sized portion a day, possibly more, depending on a couple of factors. But basically what we've been teaching in the fire lifestyle, you're going to apply religiously. You do not want to have any toxins in your diet, so eat as much organic as possible. And then it's possible at this stage to reduce meat intake if you have enough reserves. If you're already losing weight or so, don't do this. But I often ask my patients to go vegan for about 6 to 8 weeks. It does help because there's glutamine, which also feeds the cancer. So there's a rationale for short-term intervention with a vegan diet, but it's not a long-term good strategy because, as I said, cachexia, muscle loss is a big killer. You do not want to lose muscle, so you do need to eat meat. It's more important to eat the meat and grow your body than it is to starve the cancer of glutamine. Having said that, when you're actually approaching your actual chemotherapy, again, chemotherapeutic agents are mostly akin to sugar. So they look like sugar, and the cancer gobbles them up. So why does the cancer do it? Because the cancer loves sugar. So if something that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine 2013, which I've applied and modified slightly, they looked at patients who had been fasting for 72 hours before chemotherapy for breast cancer, and they found these patients had much improved, and something like 80% improved outcomes in terms of cancer being destroyed, and roughly 80% reduction in side effects of the chemotherapeutic agent. So simply by lowering your blood glucose so much by 3 days of fasting, you are able to make the cancer cells ravenously hungry for sugar. They lap up the chemotherapeutic agent. There's nothing left for the body. So you focus the poison in the cancer cells. The body is healthier. The cancer is dead. And that's what you want. It's often used nowadays. This technique is used in another way where people inject insulin before giving chemotherapeutic agents. And that has a similar effect. The blood glucose drops and the cancer cells get hungry. And then you have the addition of the therapeutic agent, which then is lapped up by the cancer. How I've modified it, I tell patients to fast for 48 hours before the chemotherapy and for 24 hours after it has been administered. So again, 72 hours, but slightly shifted. And that seems to have even better effects in terms of enhancing the effects of the chemotherapy and decreasing the side effect profile of the chemotherapy.
So basically what you're saying, if I must go for chemo, I do a 72-hour fast, and the third day of my 72-hour fast is the day when I'll be receiving my chemo.
Yeah, and just drink water, tea, and coffee during that time.
Yeah, okay. And obviously the whole thing, when you're preparing yourself for the chemo, must I eat meat or not meat? That really is an individual decision that must be taken with the physician. We can't just make a point blank thing. Like with all of what you're just saying, it's broad principles. Everyone should be looked at individually.
Yes, for sure.
Stephen, last word from you. We've now covered a vast amount of terrain over the past hour or so, discussing cancer, prevention of cancer, treatment, and how to cope with if you decide to go for chemo. Any last word from you and Frank about cancer, approaches to cancer, and alternative ways of treating it?
I wish I had my years back and the knowledge that I have now, because if you think about what we've spoken about tonight, and it's obviously far more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Journals and books have been written about this. Cancer is in large majority of cases, in the overwhelming majority of cases, is a self-inflicted metabolic disease, most of which you can avoid. You cannot completely avoid toxification, as Frank explained. Prevention should be the aim. That is why, to me, it's not negotiable. The fire diet or the fire lifestyle, the low no carb lifestyle is essential. Normal vitamin D levels. You must look after yourself, and we mustn't forget about putting our bare feet on the sand and getting some electrons from the earth.
All the grounding.
Swim in the sea, go walk, laugh a lot. Prevention. And if you are in the situation, calm down, try and calm down, think very carefully, and make your choices. Make good choices based on information. That's my final word.
Thanks. Frank, if last word from your side, if you've been diagnosed with cancer, you've had your chemo, you've had your surgery, and now it was a simple cancer, it's not all over the place. Now you're on hormone therapy and you are feeling absolutely terrible. Can you be weaned off some of those chronic stuff by just using some of the stuff that we've learned on the fire journey?
Yes, on paper, yes. Obviously, this is a discussion between a prescribing doctor and the patient, or an informed physician at least. But all of these long-term anti-cancer therapies instituted after a cancer has been treated have got very little evidence backing them up, because they never tested against placebo. So we don't really have proper data that we can say they actually work. And the patients feel terrible, and there's no real benefit that I can see. The real benefit against cancer lies with having high vitamin D levels, having a very low sugar intake, having a generally healthy lifestyle of exercise and lots of fun with friends and family. Those are the things that are far more important in preventing your second cancer than taking a prescription drug which is going to make you feel horrible. We haven't even spoken about cortisol, which is a major contributor to cancer as well. And I always refer to insulin and cortisol as the evil twins. They have got a very close relationship. And cortisol is the anti-fun hormone. It's a stress hormone. It's one of the reasons, I can't say how many times I've seen people, a woman developing breast cancer roughly a year after going through a divorce. The stress of a major life event, whether it's the death of a loved one, whether it's divorce, whether it's just something going wrong in your life, is such that a year or what later you have a cancer, and this cancer grows quite rapidly. It's not a slow-growing cancer simply because of the high cortisol level. So the higher the cortisol, the faster the cancer will grow. And it's for this reason also that we should be very careful about encouraging this use of steroids as a medication, because it can also induce cancers to grow much faster than the normal natural rate. So I want to tell people, whatever happens, if you still don't know about your cancer, because all of us got cancer. If you're over 50, you've got a cancer somewhere in your bodies are keeping in check. So either you don't know about your cancer, or you know about your cancer, or you had a cancer and now you are trying to avoid a second cancer. All of us can benefit from the same basic fire principles, and then by cleverly using nature to help us stabilize our genome so that we can fight the cancers without having to fear that our cells will go rogue and start attacking us.
Thanks so much, Frank. Thanks, Stephen. Being diagnosed with cancer, living with cancer, is to remember to still live. That life is worth celebrating. That life is not just about what's happening inside a cell. It's also what's happening in relationships, forgiveness, joy, having fun, community. And also to remember that the approach to cancer is also a biopsychosocial spiritual approach. We've largely talked about bio, the biological, what's happening in the cells. We've talked about psycho, our thinking, our stress levels, socio, our friendships, forgiving other people, having fun, living in community. But also to remember that the spiritual side, that life is a continuum. And whatever you think about life and cancer, is that there's always hope. Hope in this life, hope after this life. And what we're experiencing now is something that we have to deal with in different ways, as we've discussed today. Frank, last word from you.
No, I can just say I agree with everything that you said. And maybe the last word I want to leave with everybody is hope, that there is absolute every possible reason on the planet to have hope when you're diagnosed with cancer. Do not despair. Do not just simply crumble down. There is so much reason for hope. That's all I will say as the last word.
Thank you. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your wisdom. Thanks, Frank. Thanks to everybody who've joined us. And please give us your feedback and how we can further assist you to stay in the circle. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.